do my best to represent the main sociological theories that gives an understanding to violence. But I will start first and foremost with defining, if you wish, what is violence. Violence, normally and generally speaking, is a behavior that causes harm, injury, or destruction to individuals, groups, or property. And sociologists try to explain violence by reference to structural, societal, if you want, reasons, by reference to cultural reasons, because every society has its own culture, norms, values, and by situational factors, i.e., the situation you are in, the pressure of the moment you are in, right? That's a situational, if you wish, factors. Now, there are several types of violence I'd like you to take into account. The first one, it's called physical violence, just like physical force intended to kill, to harm another person. Examples are many in our society and in other societies as well, such as assault, domestic violence. Recently you've seen and you heard what my colleague Abdullah has said about it, murder and violent crime. And yes, I mean, Bondi, I don't have to repeat what examples has been already mentioned in support of this situation in our society. There's also what is called psychological or emotional violence. And this violence causes, if you wish, emotional harm or trauma to the person who is affected by it. It affects their mental well-being. And here, by violence, by emotional violence, I mean, sorry, I've been like forgetting to do this.
Directed that way.
Okay.
That way.
That way?
Directed that way.
Ah, that way.
There.
Okay. I mean, such as verbal abuse. I mean, you know, when you verbally abuse your partner or your friend or the person on the street for his color, for his ethnicity, for his religion, verbal abuse. Bullying, that happens a lot in Australia, especially in schools and among peer groups. Intimidation and harassment. Okay, so that's what is meant by it. And okay, sexual violence. Sexual violence is any sexual act performed without the consent of the victim, often involving physical or psychological coercion, ikrah, qasr, that's the coercion, right? Example can be rape, and believe me, rape happens sometimes within the marriage institution. It doesn't have to be between two people who are not like married. Sexual assault, molestation, taharrush al-jinsi in Arabic, and sexual harassment. Okay. And economic violence, and I guess it has been clearly elaborated and illustrated by my friend Abdullah, which is related to exploitation of laborers. It is financial exploitation, labor exploitation, not having equal opportunity to work, sometimes discriminating against you when you come to the labor market because of your gender, because of your religion, because of your ethnicity. They all add up to what we call, if you wish, economic violence. So economic violence played out within the labor market, and ethnic discrimination played out within the labor market, and gender differences. This is what it means, okay? They are connected. Okay, and then cultural or symbolic violence. And the definition here of cultural symbolic violence is such that it leads to marginalization of the person against whom the cultural violence is exerted or inflicted, devaluation of his or her cultural practices. such as during the time of colonialism, when Western countries colonized non-Western countries, and the way they dealt with their culture. The assumption was that, you know, they are savages, they are backward, underdeveloped culturally, and therefore they should be colonized. Or imperialism, we see it, and a cultural imperialism, we see it up till now, you know, in many shapes and forms. Or systematic racism as a form of symbolic violence. We all know in Australia how sometimes Muslims are called Mozzies or Muzzies or Spik. Or we all heard, especially in the 90s and the early 21st century, the talk about Lebanese as Lebs and Habibs. You know, they are all meant to be like denigrating and terms. Okay, and there is also what is called structural violence. Structural violence is violence that is due to structural reason, the way society is structured, the way society is politically structured, economically structured. Now, if you are living in a society where the wealth is, is unevenly distributed in a very radical manner, the way it has been shown in the case of Australia, I mean, of course, there are other countries which are much worse than Australia, then you would realize that this is not simply the result of individual act, but rather of a system, of a whole system. Property relationship, property ownership, distribution of wealth, and unequal opportunity, all these add up to the creation of what we call, let's say, unequal distribution in wealth. Poverty as well, it has been already referred to and explained. Institutional racism. Racism is not only a relationship between two people who are interacting. Racism can be institutional in the sense that it can be embodied in the very structure of the institution, and that institution indirectly would be discriminating against you, be it on a gender basis or on a racial basis, such as religion, nationality, and so on, so forth. All right? And the last one is collective violence. And violence can be collective. It's not necessarily always individual. And by collective violence, I mean violence that manifests itself in wars between countries. Genocidal war in Gaza, for instance, at the moment, it's a typical, most extreme form of genocidal, collective violence. Terrorism, state-sponsored violence. Well, Australia historically had played a major part in supporting America when it was waging a war, collective violence in Vietnam. Australia supported America when it invaded Iraq. Australia at the moment is complicit one way or another in the war that is taking place collectively in inflicting violence in Gaza. So these are examples of what I mean by collective violence in the Australian context. So there are, if you wish, when we move to, therefore, sociological explanation of violence, we need to look into the phenomenon which is deeply embedded, represented, immersed in social structure, in cultural norms, and in human social interaction. Now, there are several theories in this context. Now, we defined violence, generally speaking, and types of violence, and now we have to move into theoretical framework trying to explain violence. Now, the first one, it's called structural functionalism. In Arabic, if you wish, al-wadhifiyya al-binyawiyya. This is a theory, just to put it in a nutshell, which says society is like the motor of a car. It is made up of components. Each component is complementary to the other, and that if one component fails to function properly, then this will lead to form of violence. Give you an example more like empirical, and you can feel it and relate to. Let's say if the family is a very important structure in society. If the family is dysfunctional, it's not working properly, it leads to members of the family feeling unattached to society, disconnected and frustrated, and they may exert violence in order to sort of like assert themselves, or in anger of society which does not accept them, and so on and so forth. So the idea of structural functionalism is to look at society as a whole made of integrated component. The failure of one component may lead to violence. Now, the problem with this theory, and this will take us to the second theory, which is conflict theory, is that it doesn't explain why is it in the first place that component fails to function. And I think conflict theory, which is here, then the next one, tries to shed some light on why this failure in the component of society. Right? Conflict theory says, well, hold on, society is not a whole totality made up of complementary elements that really feed upon each other, but rather there is some inequality between these who are living in society, supported by the institution of society. So the inequality creates conflict, and conflict generates an environment which is conducive to violence in society. So violence can be, therefore, a response, can be, not necessarily an inevitable result of economic inequality and disparity. Violence can be also, and not necessarily, but conducive to a situation where you have a society which is known to be not democratic, where there is dominance and there is, authoritarian regimes, and power is exerted unjustifiably over those who are outside power. And also, violence in such a situation can be the catalyst, can be the motor of change in a society which is suffering from inequality and problems, and people raise up in arms, or they demonstrate, and social movements in order to change. So they use violence as a method to reach to a changing of society and to its transformation. So then, if you want, this tells us a bit about violence by reference to the inequality in the structure of society. But at the end of the day, violence happens through individuals. And individuals have thoughts, and they have values, and they have motivations. And therefore comes the importance of this theory, which I believe, again, cannot be the only theory that would explain violence, but it's an important theory, and it's called symbolic interactionism, i.e., that people, when they engage in violence, they are motivated by norms, by justification, by ideas that justify the exertion of violence. Now, of course, there are structural reasons behind this motivation and norms, but you need also to examine the kind of what happens in their mind, what is it that lead them intellectually, right, symbolically, to exert violence. And here, I think there are important pointers that I need to mention to you, such as social learning, that individuals learn violent behavior through social interaction. Let's say you happen to be in a place where there is a gang in the area, and you start associating yourself with the gang. And the gang, really valorizes violence, because it is actually a gang, and it needs to exert violence. And if you don't exert violence, you're not a member of us. So in a way, being with them, you sort of like accept your violence as a way of being valorized, as a way of being recognized. Labeling theory, نظرية الوصم، أن تصم الآخر، يعني to label him or her. Okay? Well, you individuals become deviant because of societal reactions to them. So if you are encouraged, or you are unpunished when you are violent, then you are encouraged to sort of become more and more violent. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. Role of symbols. Look, I mean, if you are a man patriarchal, raised in a patriarchal environment, which we mostly are in society up till now, unfortunately, right? Violence is an indicator that you are really a masculine man. If you don't engage in violence, you're not really a man. You're not masculine enough, right? So that's what it means. When you give symbolic meaning to your action, that would really enforces and encourages violence. Patriarchy and the level of domestic violence that we see in Australia, I think, cannot be explained by simply referring or resorting to the understanding of the individual as such. We have to understand his thinking, what goes through his mind, against the background of what I call the patriarchal structure in which he is raised and we are immersed. The structure is patriarchal, and therefore it really secretes norms of masculinity, aggressivity, and violence as being part and parcel of being a man. Otherwise, you are not a man. How many? 2 minutes, plus? 3 minutes? Look, I mean, I don't want to go even further. I would like to just raise two more basic ideas. Gramsci, because I like him, and he's one of my favorite theorists, who is the founder of the Communist Party in Italy, died in the prison because of Mussolini. He came up with the idea of hegemony, and I like this idea very much. Hegemony is a way of al-haymana in Arabic. Is a way of describing how the ruling class rules through cultural values, and it becomes therefore hegemonic, right? And that's very important. And to Gramsci, he says, in democratic, such as our society, Australian society, in democracy, we don't rely simply on coercive state institutions. We rely on civil society, i.e. the media, education, knowledge, civil society, in order to create a type of thinking, a type of norms that will make us accept inequality and accept exploitation and accept gender inequality and accept racism, right? It becomes like a common sense, and that's the most important key concept. The common sense becomes, you don't question your ideas. You think it as being natural. Well, I am violent, it's natural because I am a man. That kind of, when the ideology of the ruling class becomes common sense, this is when the ruling class is very happy. And it sounds as if it is, democracy, and everybody is willingly doing what they are doing. Willingly, in other words, serving exploitation, gender inequality, domination, and so on and so forth. And the last one I want to briefly refer to is the theory of symbolic violence by a French sociologist whose name is Pierre Bourdieu. Now, symbolic violence is really an elaboration of Gramsci's view about hegemony. He wants to go even further. He wants to say, listen, you don't only have common sense, but common sense becomes part of your internal structure, your habitus, the way the internal structure, to a point where your categories of perception, your moral categories, your classification of the world around you becomes internalized, becomes your nature, طبع تبعك. In Arabic you say هذا طبعه هيك. So that's the habitus. So he focuses on habitus, even exploring more the idea of common sense. In addition, he says, the importance of symbolic violence is that it makes you misrecognize the inequality and the unfairness and the exploitation in society, and the discrimination and the racism. You don't recognize it as such. You think it is normal. You think it is legitimate. It is justifiable. And this is the epics. This is the if you want, the top level of what I call violence, symbolic violence, is when you get to a point where you think abnormality is normal, when you think bankruptcy of morality in the world as it is happening right now in world politics is something, nothing wrong with the world. There is nothing wrong with the world. And thank you very much.